Hello, everyone, and welcome to another VITA Learning webinar featuring Peter Pizzi. Today's webinar concludes a 6-week series with Peter. All of those previous recordings, as well as today's webinar, you can find on our VITA YouTube channel and other social media contact points as well. The CE, many of you are going to ask about CE. The CE after the webinar, we will send you a follow-up email from the education department, and they will have some links in which you can click on, and that'll direct you to a little questionnaire and a little information fields that you can fill in all your CE information, your name and where you're at, and your CDT number or your dental license if you're a dentist as well. So just a couple other follow-ups. As I mentioned, all the recordings are located on our VITA Learning web channel, VITA, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So if you want to revisit them, please do so. So today's webinar featuring Peter Pizzi is going to be implants, the pink and white, starring, of course, Peter Pizzi. So I will turn it over to Peter. It's all yours.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks so much. And welcome back, everybody. Boy, it's really hard to believe that it's been 6 weeks, right? It's funny, I've done a bunch of web series over the years, and sometimes you look at them as so daunting, how long they're going to be, and boy, the time flies. So based on the fact that today is our last one, and I'm kind of sad about that, and maybe we can add some more. If you folks have some topics you want to go through, you can email myself or Jim. But because this implant is such a mass thing to talk about for me, kind of like with veneers, it was a little bit more of a struggle for me to harness this one. So normally when we start, I would go through a review of what we did. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to save us a few minutes here and dive in. So obviously we started with the diagnostic communication, went through lithium silicates, D-silicates, talked about zirconia, then went through feldspathic, and then shade communication and photography. Today, we're going to focus on implants, white and pink parts. And I think there's more to it than just either one implant or just the white part or just the pink part. So today our focus is going to be to encompass all of that. And like I said, I'm going to squeeze in a lot of stuff into our time. I'll try to stay as close to time as possible. So first, let's understand that for me, everything starts the same way. I don't care what the restorative option is. I can't figure that out until I understand what the face looks like, where the white belongs, and where the pink belongs. That's always the first protocol for anything that we're going to do. Face, white, pink. And normally I would say, and who the person is. I would add the fourth dimension to that, because the parameters of that patient that we're working on plays a factor into that. Today, instead of adding the who the person is, I'm going to add the implant in. And this is where it becomes even more challenging for us to work through the process today, because now not only are we dealing with the face, the white, and the pink and the person, but we're also dealing with different aspects of either biology or implant placements and how they help or hinder us sometimes. And let's be real, they're not always perfect. Now, I will tell you that a while back, a friend of mine said to me, and I thought it was a great thing to say, and I might contradict it even though it's great. He said that the dentist's job is to manage the pink. Manage the bone in the pink. That's the dentist's job. And the technician's job is to manage the white. And you know, when he said that, I thought, wow, that's really a great way to look at it. And I started thinking through my cases and realizing how many times maybe the dentist didn't do enough or I didn't do enough. But then I started over-analyzing it like I do, because that's my brain. And I said, you know, that's a great statement in some ways, but I'm going to disagree with it in others, because as a technician, I should also understand the biology, the bone levels, where the implants can and can't be placed. And as a dentist, I want them to understand the restorative and the white and the materials we can use and the components that are involved. So realistically, I love the statement because it does put onus on each of our roles as to what to manage. But I think to get to that next level, we have to break through that concept. And we have to start realizing that the dentist needs to understand our side, and we need to understand their side as much as possible. So I'm going to try to go through that a little bit today. Also, I want to be clear that implants are a huge, huge part of our market. And when I travel around the world these days and I get to see so many offices, I'm kind of surprised when I go into a laboratory or even a clinical site and I don't see a lot of the implant happening. What do I mean is I'm looking in a laboratory and I see 80 pans in front of me that they're very busy, but in those 80 pans, there's only 3 implants. I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. I know the implant market is huge, not only financially, what it contributes to the profession, but also just in general. As huge as it is, that doesn't mean it's better for us on some occasions. And I might argue there are some times where we shouldn't use implants, and there are definitely times when we should. But for our perspective as technicians, where this has really become so challenging for us is years ago, let's be honest, the implant placements were kind of weak, and we struggled for understanding angles and positions and how to restore. I think that's a lot better today than it's ever been before. Now the challenge is, though, not all our implant cases are a single molar, which is fairly easy to manage, or a full mouth implant case, which also is fairly easy to manage depending on what you're trying to restore it with. Where I see the bigger challenge is in a case like you see in front of you. One implant, in between a veneer, maybe a full coverage crown, maybe a bridge, maybe another whole different material based on how we're preparing teeth next to that implant. And that's where it starts to become even more challenging for us as technicians. So we're starting to figure out how to use these implants in different spaces. And I see a lot of this, right? Like if you look at a case like this, I have a veneer on the number 8, 9 and 10 are 2 implants that I needed to put pink on. Let's add some more to the equation, and then a full coverage crown on the 11. And again, each of these things adds risk to what we do. And the higher the risk, the harder it is for us to meet the demand of what's going to be satisfying and aesthetically pleasing to the patient. Obviously, the all-on market is huge today. I'm seeing so many, not only surgical people, technicians being in the surgical environments, but also just a number of these all-on 4, all-on 5, all-on 6 kind of cases. They're not my favorite cases, to be honest with you. I do them, but I'm very cautious of where I do them and why, based on some of the reasons we spoke about in the previous modules. And then a lot of these cases are also just big implant cases where they're managing both white and pink. And it's part of our job to restore not only the fancy white parts of the teeth, but to make the gingival or the lip support be there in our pink ceramics too. And let's be clear, pink isn't only about implants. This case actually had an implant in it. We actually wanted to put the implant to sleep, but we couldn't get that tissue where we wanted it, and I had to do a really tiny little bit of tissue in there. And again, these are really challenging for us, right? So I have a single veneer, a 3-unit bridge, and a full coverage restoration. And that's made restorative in general much more complicated than it used to be. So it's interesting as I look back and how it's evolved. I'm going to show you a case that I did 16 years ago now. Her name was Tracy, and Tracy was probably one of the first cases that I did with a friend of mine up in White Plains, also a mentor, and taught me a lot about dentistry and implants and life in general. And I remember when I saw Tracy's case for the first time, she had some congenitally missing laterals. Implants had already been placed, so I was kind of getting a little late start on it. But why I put the case in was for 2 reasons. One, back then, putting metal ceramic next to a veneer was a huge, huge challenge for me, and that scared me. I wasn't really even thinking about the clinical side, right? I was thinking about the white. I wasn't thinking about what do I do to make it emerge properly. I was thinking, how am I going to make a PFM match a veneer? So that wasn't really in my radar all those years ago. And fortunately for good people that I got to work with, like Lenny as an example, he would be adamant about, well, wait a second, I've been molding this tissue for a year. I need you to get this emergence perfect. And here's where we're going to do this. And we went through a whole process of where I made the abutment, a metal abutment and a metal coping. I sent it back to him. He put everything in the mouth. He captured that gingival architecture with some resin, sent that back to me to redo the cast, and then fabricate the veneers and everything else from that. Now, today, that seems common, right? It didn't seem like anything today if I got a case, because we're managing that right from the get-go. We're deciding where the tissue needs to be, and whether I'm managing a portion of it or the doctor's managing a portion of it, or we're doing it together, it's a lot more controlled. It took time for me to understand the importance of that teamwork and not being able to just have the doctor do it and not me think about it. And that's why I said we need to understand both. It shouldn't be that it's just one side or the other. And coincidentally, Lenny emailed me a week or two ago. He happened to catch one of these webinars, and he said how nice it was to see. And he sent me a picture of Tracy 16 years later. And I thought it'd be nice to kind of share that, because those are 4 veneers and 2 metal ceramic implants 16 years later that are still there. Obviously, she never did anything with her lower, but it's a big difference, and nice to see the longevity of the case and how the case was managed through. Now, if I go back and I start to look through the history of our cases, this is also an older case, about 10 years old maybe now. And this is Lara. Lara owns an art gallery here in Manhattan. And it was an interesting case. I won't go through all the details just for time, but in the end, the principle here is I'm looking at the face, I'm looking at the white, and I'm looking at the pink. I can tell you that the number 11 is a deciduous tooth. It's going to have to go. And that presented options for us, meaning, do we put an implant in the site? Do we make a 3-unit bridge? Maybe do we make a cantilever bridge? There's a lot of options there that we thought about 8-10 years ago. We decided to go with the implant, and we also did some orthodontic movement to push the cuspid into a better position. At that point, we needed to figure out where the incisal edge belonged, which we did, and Dr. Mike did a great job just putting some composite on there to figure that out. Even though the composite looks a little older in this picture, that was after her wearing it for a few months while the implant was healing. And then from that point, I'm going to get an impression of that, and now I have to make a decision. And the reason I wanted to go through this with you a little bit is because if you remember back in module 1, one of the things I asked of you was to think. I want you to be able to think through your cases. So here's our scenario. We know we're storing an implant on the number, number 11 it was. And now that I have it, you should be thinking, well, what material is the right material? Should I use a zirconia abutment, a lithium disilicate abutment, a metal abutment? And those decisions should be made on your knowledge of what's the best functional aesthetic process for that patient. For me to make that decision, what am I thinking of? Emergent profile, aesthetics, and the functional capabilities that that tooth is going to withgo or be under pressure for as a implant restoration. One of the first things I did was I grabbed my camera and I took off one of the flashes, I put it behind the cast, and I took a picture. That picture now just taught me I'm dealing with a bio 1. I have a very thin tissue. So biologically, whatever I put behind it is going to show through. That means that maybe metal's not the best choice, because the metal is going to give me a gray look on the gingival surface. That's not going to help me. But as a cuspid, do I really want a zirconia or lithium disilicate there? And I'm betting that a lot of you are saying, yeah, that's what I want because it's aesthetic and it's stronger and it's hard. And if you still think that, then please go back and watch module 1 again, because the point of that was to tell you that hardness is not what gives you strength, right? Combination of rigidity and flexibility. So in the end, a cuspid that takes the most force, I want metal there. But I also have to figure out how to establish the aesthetics on that. And that 10 years ago was easy, as it is today. Now, why did I not choose a zirconia or a lithium disilicate abutment? And I threw a few pictures here just to kind of give you a reference point. When I have a diameter of that implant, whether I use a shortened piece or an elongated piece, in the end, how much zirconia or lithium disilicate do I really get in that structural zone? And I would argue, what kind of Dow and ferrule are you really creating with a very hard, very brittle material that's now very thin? So I'm going to tell you that I'll show you a case or two where I did zirconia abutments. Today, we do not do as many zirconia abutments as we've used to. We've switched that around. We've kind of gone back to metal after the evolution to zirconia. So in this case from 10 years ago, what did we do? Well, Keon designed the abutment. He cast it. He cut the metal back, and I layered feldspathic fluorescent ceramic material on it. And I layered it on in a way where I'm going to help to get that coloration behind the gingiva. Now, this might be one of the biggest keys in implants that I want you guys to really try to pay attention to or grab a quick photo of. This is important because It gives you all the basic parameters of what you need to understand. The implant usually should be placed bone level, and bone level to the height of the tissue, meaning just about where the apex of that tissue is about 4 millimeters. That's an ideal place for us to create emergence profile and manage the biology. The second thing to be aware of is marginal finish line to adjacent CEJ or contact area. That also needs to be about 2 millimeters. And again, that's for biology, managing the tissue. And then lastly, the emergence profile itself of the restoration should really be developed in the last millimeter of the soft tissue. And I think you're all aware, but in case you're not, years ago from the interface, our implants used to kind of belly out and be this round structure to fill the space. And over the years, we've evolved and realized that the more narrow we make that, and we figured it out by platform switching, which by the way was accidental years ago. But the point of it is that the more narrow we get that emergence out of the implant, the better chance you have of maintaining, establishing the tissue height and the bone levels. So the goal is to keep that emergence a little bit more narrow as possible, and the actual emergence of the restoration just in that last millimeter of the tissue itself. So based on that concept, where some of the challenges come in for us today with milled abutments, whether they're zirconia, the silicate, or titanium, is that even though we have great machinery, and I have 2 great machines in my lab, I have 3 of them actually, and we mill and design everything, but even though they're 5-axis machines, they don't have the ability to mill exactly what I need. Matter of fact, I would argue that if you look at all the companies' CAD design, they don't even give you the right shapes to start from. I don't want that emergence, and I don't want that emergence. They're both incorrect. I want the most narrow emergence I can get, and then start pairing out as I get into that last millimeter of the soft tissue. Challenge with that from a digital point of view is as I go in to start changing the shapes of these, I think you all know from the digital world, if I put a push here, well, that doesn't stay exactly where it is anymore. It changes in a 3-dimensional form. So I have to be really cautious in how I manage that. How did we manage it? We went old school and we kind of started doing more metal abutments again. They're more costly, the doctors pay more for it, we pay more for the parts and the time and the labor, but in the end, the result is a better result because I can manage the aesthetics and the emergence profile better. Another pet peeve of mine, and I'm going to throw my laboratory technicians under the bus here, pontics or emergent profiles are not circles. Every tooth is different. So when I see you scrape a little tissue on a cast and say that's going to be where the pontic is, I want to strangle people sometimes because that's not the way a tissue or an emergence profile of a tooth works. Central shape is a definite shape, the lateral shape and the cuspid shape, and each of them are very different as you look from the incisal edge down into the actual junction where the tissue meets. And your job is to manage the emergence profile as close to nature as possible. And that means an understanding of the tooth form as it comes out of the gum tissue. And another pet peeve that I always say is the #1 cause of implant failure is cementation. So I will talk a little bit throughout this today about the fact that I'm trying not to cement crowns whenever I can. The goal is to always screw retain, even set screw retain sometimes. And now with angled screws and the evolution, it's making it easier in some ways, more challenging in others. But our job is still the same. Your marginal placement, never more than 0.5 millimeters below the tissue. Because that #1 cause of failure in this country, or in the world for that matter, is your fault. It's your fault and the doctor's fault. And it's our job to change that right away. Don't put your margins lower than 0.5 of a millimeter. You solve a lot of decementation problem, excuse me, but also be aware that also has to do with the biology. Thicker tissue, harder to move out of the way. Thinner tissue gets out of the way quicker, but also doesn't always want to stay there after you've endangered it a little bit. You have to be very aware of the biology part, and that's why the dentist technician team is so important. So on this particular case, I wound up making an old school metal ceramic crown with a ceramic margin over a metal abutment with a ceramic margin on the abutment. We'll place that in, and you can see that The ceramic is kind of managing the tissue for me up in there, but I have the strength and the dowel and ferrule of the metal for support in my final cement. And it was cemented restoration, by the way. Today, I probably wouldn't do that. But here's what I want you to notice. Remember, face white, pink. And as we talk about the pink, let's be clear. I have a veneer, cuspid lateral, central, central, lateral. And now look at the pink of the number 11. That's an implant restored PFM crown. And in order for us to be successful, that's part of the success. I'm going to be honest and tell you, I think this stuff is the easier stuff. What you like and don't like, what some of my doctors like, less translucency or more, those are workable. But our real job is make sure we get our interfaces proper. And that's managing the white and pink between our restorative and nature is really important. And by the way, this patient, I didn't go through the whole story with you, but when we first met her, we thought she was a brachial facial patient. Why? Because her acquired smile never gave us more than this. And you could see it in her eyes how uncomfortable she was to smile. But as soon as she got her restorations in, we realized she wasn't brachial facial. She was a VME, a vertical maxillary excess patient, which is also why these cases help teach us how to change our photography sequence, right? Last week in Module 5, I talked about the Duchenne smile and finding out the true lip dynamic of the patient. Why? Because I didn't want to make that mistake. And then we made an abutment that was ugly, and now when she smiles, she has a gray spot there. Would have ruined the entire case. So it's really important that we manage our way through these cases, importantly, and understand that implant placement and the parameters of the implant, although it's evolved, there are still some basics you need to kind of be very aware of that will help you manage your way through the day. So first, from a biological point of view, let's be clear. The health of the patient. Are they medicated? Are they diabetic? Are they smokers? We need to know those things, because if they're not implant candidates, then we shouldn't even be thinking about that option. Do they have bone or do they not have bone? What's the position of the implants? Is there a nerve in the way? Is the sinus in the way? Are there things that we can't do? Is there enough cortical bone to keep the implant in the angle that we want? And all of these are part of our job to be aware of, just like it's part of the doctor's job to be aware of what does the patient show? What is the aesthetic parameter? What is the tissue like? Do I need to do a bone graft or a tissue graft? Does the patient have a very high lip dynamic? Does the lip need support from the restoration, or is the restoration going to be in the way of the normal lip movement and dynamic? And again, this is why the two-sided approach to me is really the right approach. And this is the evolution process that we go through. So I actually just put an old case in here because I wanted you to see that I thought differently years ago. And I remember when I started switching from metal abutments to zirconia abutments. And here was an example of it. And by the way, this is another 10-year-old case, but notice I was trying to screw anywhere I could, right? Any areas that could be a screw retained, I would. And if we had to cement based on the placement, we did. The other thing you should notice is these are zirconia abutments. And although it seems really great because we wanted to manage the aesthetic risk, he didn't really show it. He truly was a brachiofacial, and he didn't want to have any more surgeries. But the point for me was it the right choice to go zirconia abutments? Now, fortunately, it's 10 years later, and we restored the entire mouth. You can see not only the vertical difference, but the difference in his old teeth to his new restorations, both right and left sides, and then the final restorations with 10-year-old photography. And in the end, this all worked. This is a doctor from Canada that I used to do a lot of cases with. The point here, though, is, did I really get a stronger abutment in the end? And I go back to the picture I showed you before, and I'd say the answer is no. Because remember, I have a diameter that I'm dealing with of the implant, 3 millimeters, 3.5, 4, depending on which implant you pick. And especially in the anterior sections, just use that to wrap another material around. Doesn't seem like the best path for me. So we've gone backwards, and we're back to a lot more metal abutments in these areas. We will sometimes do ceramic margins of them or color the abutment with opaque materials if that's also going to be a challenge for us. If we're using zirconia or lithium disilicate, we can manage it that way too. Also, an older case, this is a young girl. I met Jessie when she was, I believe, about 15 years old. And it's interesting if you really get a good look at her picture, meaning that look at the bone. look at the concavities around the 7 and the 10. So she had congenitally missing laterals. And I remember this so well because I think I've talked to everybody here about having a big toolbox and really thinking through the cases. And it's funny because this is a Dr. Mike case, and we probably still can, argue is the wrong word, we could probably still have heated conversation about this case because we think we did the best thing for this patient at that time. But then we wonder, did we? And of course, it's so much easier to look back and say, I should have, I should have, I should have. But I like to go to look back and say, how can I be better the next time? So if I walk you through Jesse's case a little bit, we looked at it and we thought, okay, some orthodontics, we're going to move the teeth in the right place. We'll put some laterals in there to make her feel comfortable. And sure enough, when she turns 18, we're going to consider getting her some implants. At that point, we made her a Maryland bridge. And I have to be honest, for an old school Maryland bridge, and I mean old school because if you see the occlusal, it's a 6-unit metal bridge from cuspid to cuspid, where I would never do that today, right? Today would be a 1-wing Maryland bridge, either off the cuspid or off the central, because we know those dislodge a lot easier, a lot less because of the movement of the teeth. But the point was, even with the Maryland bridges that look fairly okay, you could still see she doesn't have the bone. And by the way, Jessie was a wonderful girl, but high maintenance sounds bad. I'm going to say she was difficult and wouldn't have done well with surgical procedures. The implants were a step above for her, but having anything else, bone grafts, tissue grafts, was not in the picture for her at all. So when she turned 18, 2 implants were placed. By the way, that number has been changing over the years. Now they're saying you should wait a little bit longer, especially with women because of the growth cycles. But in general, we put 2 3.0 implants in. And also why this stands out to me, because back then, there were no secondary components. I didn't have UCLAs and angled abutments and unis and all the things that we have today. So the only way that we could actually restore these newer 3.0 implants back then was to send them to the companies to mill the abutment for us, which is what we wound up doing. And these are the 2 milled abutments that we got back. And I want to be clear that we did design them, although I don't think I designed them this way, but this is what came back after we had gone through the process, again, early CAD development. And we put some provisionals in the patient's mouth based on her new implants. And within a week, you can notice right away, look what's happening to the gum tissue around the 10. And I got to be honest with you, if this is my daughter, I'm going to be pretty upset with this. I'd be like, well, wait a second. We're spending time and money and years, and the tissue looks worse now than it did with the silly Maryland bridge that was on there. So what's going on? And we had to come back and say, yeah, what is going on? Well, when we started looking at the x-rays and the abutments, we realized that we were in violation of the biology, the biological width, both height of bone to tissue and implant position to adjacent teeth. I don't mean the body of the implant, I mean the abutment. So Dr. Mike unscrewed the implants for me, gave them back to me, and I ground the heck out of them, made them into ice cream cones, basically made 2 new temporary cylinders and 2 new temporary copings, and then refabricated the provisional for her. And you can see right away how much that tissue dropped just by the biology, just making sure that we're not violating those rules of 2 millimeters away from the adjacent tooth and where the emergence profile should be as it comes out of the implant. Now, will she ever have perfect tissue there? No. She doesn't have the bone. She has a concavity that is around that tissue area. But our job is to try to manage it as best as possible. And this is a week after insertion. And by the way, let me be clear, we have a veneer on the cuspid, metal implant abutment on the lateral, veneer on central, metal implant abutment on the lateral, and veneer on the cuspid again. So 4 veneers, feldspathic, and 2 metal ceramic restorations. And we monitored Jessie as much as possible, a few weeks more after insertion. And actually, Jessie got so into the process, I think she actually worked for Mike in his office for a few years. So she's a sweetheart of a girl, and it was really nice that she enjoyed the experience so much. And in the end, I don't know if she still works in the dental profession or not, but I'm sure she's still a patient. So here is Jessie all finished up, and I think you get the concept, right? That we can do things. We're not always 100% right in how we do them. And the debate I would have today, should we put those implants in? And I'm not sure. I tell you, I've managed cases differently. Maybe that's sacrificing the cuspid, right? Instead of making a veneer prep on the cuspid, I make a 360 prep. So I'm sacrificing tooth structure, but I'm not putting the patient through the implant surgery and the tissue management issue that we're going to face there, and make a 2-unit cantilever bridge. I've done many of those, and that works very well too, but that's not for every scenario. I guess the point I'm making is, I don't think we were wrong. I think we did the best we could for this case at the time. But if I don't learn from it, and if you don't grow from it, then we're not evolving through the process of what we need to do. So I'll walk you through another case that we finished up a little bit more recently, and this is going to get into a little bit more of where I kind of go against implants. As much as it's about implants, it's about you knowing when and where and why, because not everything should be an implant. So I'm going to call SD as the implants gone wrong, and I'll walk you through SD's story kind of quickly. Unfortunately, I know we think of all on 5 as being, or all on 4, or all on 6 as implant restorations. I'm going to call this a new title. I'm going to call it all on teeth. And we're going to use 5 teeth because that's all she had. Now, she did have 2 abutments, but I don't want to use them. And I'm going to tell you that I actually met with my team on this case back in 2014. 2014, we had dinner in a restaurant in Manhattan, Stanton Social, one of my favorite places. Not there anymore. And I remember sitting down and talking about this, and I could tell you that my thought at that moment was, put those implants to sleep and let's start restoring her. And I didn't get the same feel from the group around me, the surgeons and the doctors. Well, poor Essie has gone through this for her whole life. She was born with a V-shaped cleft palate, and you can see she spent her whole life with, I think disfigurement is a bad word, but obviously an uncomfortable position aesthetically for her, where the teeth are, and she kind of lived with it. It was a challenge for her. Somewhere around the age of, I think, 15 or 16, she actually had her first orthodontic surgery, where they tried to widen the arch and move it forward, and I don't think it worked very well. And 15 years later, in 2004, 5 surgeries later, is when I actually met SD, and you can see that she didn't look that much different than where she started from. A little bit better, maybe, but in her mind, she still wasn't really comfortable. During that period of time, one of the surgical procedures was 2 implants that were placed in the 8 and 9 position. And if you really look at where those implants are, you start to say to yourself, well, I'm not sure that's helping us here. So I'm not sure how useful they are, especially because she had a fairly huge overjet, and she was a very V-shaped arch, and very challenging how to manage the aesthetics with these 2 teeth. So in 2015, before we really got too involved in the case, it was decided that we would cut those crowns off, make her some new provisionals, and start trying to fix the aesthetic parameters. And sure enough, the day we did that, whatever can go wrong went wrong. Crowns got cut off, the tissue pulled away, there was no cortical plate there, and we had a whole nother nightmare to deal with. In the end, putting those implants to sleep, I still believe was the right choice, and that's what we wound up doing. So she was sent to a surgeon friend of mine, Dr. Nick Elion. Nick did a fabulous job grinding those implants down, basically, and very carefully, because after all her surgery, she doesn't have much bone over the area of the implants or under the nose. Matter of fact, it's actually a little bit of a hollow space, because after the orthodontic surgery, the bone has never really rejoined itself in that area. So she's treading on water. It's a very dangerous situation. And after a few more surgeries and the implants being put to sleep, Nick was able to get a little bit of bone and tissue back there to start giving us some options to restore. Jen and I then sat down and started working on design. Where do those teeth belong in her face? And pulled out some denture teeth, because it's a lot easier than waxing everything full contour, especially when it's edentulous areas, and then wax the rest by hand. And once we got the teeth somewhat where we wanted them to, then we duplicated that into a wax up. We rather work with wax, although we don't mind starting with the denture teeth, but instead of destroying them and reshaping them and grinding on them, we'll just transfer that into a wax up. And our goal was to get a better position for her and maintain the incisal edge that we wanted for her in her face. So the goal was really to get those centrals back somewhere more around where the vermilion border is, and still be able to create some width and space for the rest of the teeth. Once we felt we had that, we duplicated that, and I say we, the royal we, Jen duplicated that into an acrylic provisional for us. And you can see she spent a lot of time really harnessing the line angles and the heights of contour and trying to make that look aesthetic as possible for our patient. And then what we're going to do at that point is we try that in to evaluate if we thought the plane was correct and the shapes were right for her face. And then that'll come back to us and we'll actually start putting some pink composite on. Now, a little pink composite trick, and I want to be clear here, this is going to sound a little sneaky, but I want to be honest with you. So you understand the optics of composite are better than most of the materials we use. Composites have fabulous optics to them. So if you're going to use composites in the mouth for gingival or restorations, realize they don't last, but they do have great optics. What do I not want to happen? I don't want to make the pink so beautiful now that when I go to make my pink ceramic, that the composite looks better. So how do I manage that? Simply, I don't make the shade perfect in the composite. I purposely go a little light or a little dark. Why? Because I want it to be there just as reference for tooth height. I don't want any cleansability and emergence and all the other things, but what I don't want it to be is to look better of where I'm going to go in my ceramic later on. And just so you know, we tell the patient, well, when we do the temporary, the pink won't be perfect. They're just going to be in a range to give us some ideas. Now you can see how this color, the pink, looked compared to the rest of her tissue. But I have to tell you, SD was done. She saw the temp and she said, okay, we don't need to do anything else. I'm happy. I can live with this. Don't do anything else. And we were like, no, that's just a temporary. We got a ways to go here. And she's like, no, this is perfect. Don't change anything. She felt so different at this point. You can kind of see the big smile in her face. So long story short, after we had the incisal parameters established, we went on to the framework and the substructure. This was a metal ceramic, again, old school. Why did I choose metal ceramic? Well, many reasons. One, I only have 5 abutments to work with, so it's an all-on-5 case. 2, look at the connector sizes in some of the areas. Wouldn't have been ideal for a zirconia connector size, and I wanted the flexibility, being that I was going cross-arch with such a long span. So we opaqued the case. Another little pink and white trick here. You'll notice that when we opaqued where the pink is going to be, I didn't opaque it pink. I opaque it usually with A1 or B1. And the reason for that is because if you flap the tissue back and look at the bone tends to really be more in the A1, B1 range. So putting pink there isn't really the right thing to get the depth that you're looking for in your pink ceramics. You use a whiter color to do that. And you'll notice that as I'm building up the case, I'm going to focus mostly on my white part of the buildup, right? So my opacious dentin materials and my dentin materials that I'm going to start using. And you notice I did put some pink here, but at this point, all I'm really using is some dark pink, and I'll go through those colors with you in a minute. I actually used a little bit of the G4 just to give me a wash bake, but that's about all I'm going to do right now. In the bake, I'm going to focus on the white. So I got my opacious dentin. I'm going to start adding some more dentins on, start getting some shape and contour. And then as I start to finish up the case, I'm going to get my pink more done at the end. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I skipped over it just for time. I have other versions to break it down for you, so don't worry. The reason I actually wanted to show you this, because I did do something different that I don't get to do as often. And that is because of her situation, one of the ceramic margins I actually needed to do in pink ceramic. And that was a little bit of a challenge because we don't really have a higher firing pink ceramic material. So I had to kind of finish that more in the glaze and at the end of the case to seal that final margin and create the right emergence coming out of the tissue for SD. So in the end, we finished up the case. We're going to put that in SD's mouth. And you're going to see that she was fairly happy. I wouldn't say the pink is a perfect match, but again, the concern with it is really to get it cleansable and hygienic and making sure that when she smiled that she can see it. And I asked SD to make the meanest face she could for me. That was it. So you can see she's not a very mean person, and then smile like normal. And what I wanted to see is just the reaction of how she felt. And in the end, SD was super, super happy with the restoration. And by the way, we don't think it's a final restoration. We're hoping for some advancements in the bone augmentations and things we could do more of for her as time goes on. But she's been in that, I'll knock on wood now, for I think about 2 years, and she's been very happy. And you can see what we did from an x-ray point. We actually put the implants to sleep, and we tried to rebuild some of the bone. I have another x-ray shot. I didn't put it in, but you can actually see that up in this area, there's a little bit of space where the bone has not grabbed onto the upper structure of it. So it's kind of interesting. And Esty is all finished up, and she's been a fairly happy camper since. And hopefully at some point, if we have to touch up anything or change anything, we now have a system and a formula in place. So let me break down the white and pink a little bit more with another patient. So this particular patient had similar issues. He had some crown and bridge work done. He wasn't happy. Obviously, he didn't have the cleft palate and the V shape that Esty had, but not happy aesthetics overall. And I think, you can always kind of see it in the eyes, even when they're smiling. You can kind of tell that there's an uncomfortable level there. And look, it's always easy to rip the previous dentistry, so I don't know the surrounding circumstances. And I would tell everybody, instead of saying how bad somebody did, let's just figure out how we could be better, because I could tell you I have a lot of things out there that I'm not proud of either. And if I had to explain the parameters of why, some of them might be an excuse and some of them might be the truth. So I try to avoid beating up other people's work, because I know mine isn't as good as I'd like it to be either. But let me walk you through what happened here. So the implant cast was picked up, and we made a one-piece screw retain provisional. And we want to really try to manage those screw retain provisionals right from the get-go. This way we can manage the emergence profile of the tissue, and that gives the doctor a little bit more charge of managing the pink development of that. Even if it means the screw accesses come through the incisal edge or the facial, we don't care. We're really just trying to use that provisional to set the parameters and work on the tissue process. Again, metal ceramic case, an older case. This is a few years ago. And you can see I'm going to do my ceramic buildup. Now, again, in my ceramic buildup, I'm going to concentrate on the mains. We went through this in a lot of the other modules. I'm looking at chroma, I'm looking at value, and I'm looking at the age of the patient. But now as I start to work through the pink part, I'm going to start by putting my darker, warmer colors on the inside. And for me, that's going to be my G4 or my G3. So I'm going to use a little bit of my G4 first, which is the highest chroma I have. And then I'm going to start to go over that a little bit with my G3. And in truth, once I have the whole restoration built up, then I'm going to start maybe looking at a little bit of a G2 or a G1, or maybe mixing the two of them, or mixing a little G1 and G3. It depends on the scenario, but that's, or the color I'm looking for, I should say. That'll be my basic first bake at that point. And from that point, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to get as much as I can done, but I'm not going to finish this until the glaze. So I'm not sure if everybody does it this way. It's kind of a technique that I've just found useful over the years. Is I get my pink close to where I want it to be, but enough that I can see the form of my CEJ area and my interproximal contours, where I don't have any pink ceramic over them. And I get my firing done, my contour, my texture, and everything done. And then just before I'm ready to glaze the case, I'm going to take some more of my gingival powders. In this case, I took G2, I mixed in a little bit of an EE3, which is a pink translucent, and then I mixed in a little tiny bit of correction material. I did the same with the G2 and EE1, a white powder and correction material, and the same with the gingival 1 with a little bit of translucent, and again, a correction material. Now, why the correction material? Because I'm putting this powder on and I'm firing it only in my glaze with vacuum, but that means that I'm firing at a slightly lower temperature, and I want to make sure the ceramic matures all the way. So by throwing 5 or 10% of my lower fusing material in there, or correction material, I'll get a better bake. And also, just to explain, the G3, the G2 with EE3, the pink, I'm going to use because I want that pinky area in some spots, especially around the neck. But I might want whiter spots, maybe on the heights or little pieces in between where I can get a little bit more white. And sometimes I just want more translucency that has a hint of pinkishness to it, and I might mix in a gingival material for that. But again, always with the correction materials, and then I'll glaze that. And I hope you can start to see the differentials of translucencies, the depth, the whiter areas, the more chromatic areas, and how those areas lay over the white part, where they kind of look a little bit more translucent. You could see a little of the white coming through, but not a ton. And that's depending on what type of tissue you're looking for. If I wanted to make it look more like a Bio 3, I would use more color and make a thicker tissue. If I'm looking more for a Bio 1, I'm going to use less color and more translucency on it. So I'm going to manage my pink differently. And you also notice I shot this under a few different light sources, so you can start to see some of the things I meant, where some of the whites are, where the darkness are, where I used more chroma or more colors up into proximal, and then went over those with some translucent materials in the end. And this is kind of the importance with pink for me, because we do a lot of pink in the lab these days, and I think it's important that we all have a better understanding of pink. And this wound up being 3 separate implant bridges, an anterior 6, and 2 separate posterior bridges done by prosthodontist Bernadette Sava here on Staten Island with me. I think she actually did this case in one of her offices in the city, though. So let me bring you into another thing before we run too much at a time here. Let me see where we are. Okay, not too bad. So with implants, one of the things I mentioned quickly in the beginning, that I'm not a huge all-on person. I don't really love the all-on-4, all-on-6, and I don't mean you shouldn't do them. I do them. I'm just cautious of how to do them and when and where to do them because of all the things we talked about. And what it really forced me to do was create something else. So I created something years ago called an evolution system. That's what I named it. And it's a system that myself and Keon helped a lot with, and other people that I got to work with, that we spent a lot of time developing. And the way it really works is, no matter if you have 4, 6, 8, or 10 implants, again, we're always managing the site so we can create ovate sites and really develop an emergence. But what I want you to notice is the subframe. And I got to be honest with you, if you open up any of the magazines, obviously I write for IDT, I'm the editor-in-chief, but any of the magazines that you open up and you look at, and when the companies are telling us about how great their bars are or titanium is, what I saw was square bars. And I thought, boy, that doesn't make any sense to me. Why would I put a square in, a square peg in a round circle? So what I started developing was how to make those bars look like teeth. And it took me a long time and a lot of money to do that. But in the end, this is what our evolution frame looks like now. This is a titanium subframe. And you'll notice that the marginal interface, or what's going to touch the tissue, is designed to have the proper emergence and sleeve spacing for cleaning. And then the rest of the teeth are nothing more than preps for me to put a secondary material over. So it'll look like this when it's finished, because I have a second frame here. Let me break it down so you understand it. Here is my titanium frame. Here's now a 3 or 4 unit posterior bridge on each side. They slip over the titanium frame and they screw in from the lingual side now. So that gives the doctor screw retained access. And what gets returned to the doctor are 4 components. You actually have the entire titanium frame that screws in one piece, and then 3 secondary frames that all lock in. And we do lots of those. And now the screws are set from the lingual, so they have access. Is it perfect? No, nothing is perfect. But in certain scenarios, it works very well because we have retrievability. And again, doesn't mean it's easy. There's challenges to everything we do, but I think this, for me, works better in some scenarios. And we've used it in so many scenarios over the years. This is another case from Dr. Bernadette. So we've used this over and over the years. And I'll walk you through one more case that she did quickly and break down some more of the parameters. So this is Ricky, and Ricky was having his whole upper arch extracted. We did a very quick denture setup for him to evaluate the position. And once we were comfortable with that setup, we're going to duplicate that setup, which I mentioned to you before. We do that with an Annex-Dent flask. And by the way, we're big dupers. What do I mean by that? Everything we have frame-wise, we barely even use wax anymore. Keon's injecting resin materials, and we're kind of constantly making a mold of something and duping it again. Kind of like, oh, I don't know, CAD-CAM, right? We're kind of making something that's repeatable over and over again, only without having to sit down and design it over and over again or reuse other materials to mill it. We could just inject a resin in and out of it over and over again. That's a great technique for us. So once we have Ricky's position established, you'll notice that the pink is where we want it, the white is where we want it. We're going to verify the cast, and this is a standard for us. We take an implant verification jig for any of these connected bar type cases where we make a solid frame, we cut it off, send it back to the doctor labeled so they know where everything goes. Their job is to talk these down to 15 newtons, bond everything back together, either with a resin or a crazy glue or anything they want to use. And then we're going to send them also a custom tray that fits right over that. So it's called an Implant Verification Jig, and that's standard for us. The doctor will capture that in an impression for us, and then from there we'll pour our master cast. Here's the beauty though now, when we have the master cast, I also have a copy of the provisional in my flask. And I could basically just re-inject resin material, or Keon can re-inject resin material. So we're gonna get an exact replica of what the provisional looks like, and then decide where we wanna get rid of or cut it back. And we'll do that easily because it's resin. And we could also use that to design the digital framework. So we know how to get our titanium mill to be supportive underneath. This is an older frame, so I'd say the design wasn't as good as it's gotten over the years, but you get the idea. Once the frame is done, Keanu will put a little bit of wax over the frame, inject resin over it again, and then fabricate the final substructure, which he's just really cutting back and designing with the handpiece rather than having to wax it all the way through. And you'll also notice that there are set screws in the lingual, which will be part of the process. There is the metal substructure framework. And you also notice that it interlocks, right? So we have a little bit of an interlocking system there. That'll get opaque. And I always joke when I show this, as the ceramics that are out there, I hope when you see this, you guys all think like I do. And what I'm thinking is, give me a brush, I want to build that one. And by the way, notice the connector, right? I have a titanium bar underneath here, and now a very thin metal connector here that allows me to really create nice emergent profile and interproximal space and all the things we want. Why that was being fabricated, I finished up the lower, which was also going to be a metal ceramic case. And then we got the upper rolling. After my bisque bake was done, I got the lower all finished up. And normally I'd finish the upper first, but in this case, just for timing. And then I'll do the build up, just like I did every other build up over our time together. Excuse me. I'll start to put a little bit of my pink on, and then I'll finish the pink in the glaze, just like I did before. It's controllable weight. You can see the weight here is 15 pennyweights. That's for everything, the bar, the screws, the ceramic on it, the substructure, everything. And also the beauty of this is we're really managing the intaglio surface. What am I really trying to do? Create a hygienic environment. One of the flaws with these all-on concepts to me is really being very aware of how to manage the intaglio, what's happening. And you have to really make some educated decisions about when you're going to have ridge laps and when not. In truth, you should never have them. So that could be sometimes just poor surgical planning. There are times where rather than just put the implants in, we raise the height of the bone and get the aesthetic out of the zone. And this way we can actually create better emergence profile and better cleansability. And there's our final case. It all set screws in from the lingual, and our patient's fairly happy after a few months of dealing with all that. So I'm going to walk through one more case, and then we'll stop and take some questions. This is Sean. Sean had an accident. He had his 2 front teeth knocked out and lost a little bit of bone. And you've seen the process before, so I can move just as fast through this to save us some question time. But in the end, you'll notice our job was to replace the missing teeth and bony structure on Sean. First thing is same as always, where do the teeth belong in his face? And it was kind of interesting. This is a Dr. Savan case, and I think Savan probably spent more time than usual trying to get that incisal edge on his own. Why? Because our nature was telling us we need longer teeth. Look how long his cuspids are. What we didn't realize until we actually got a little bit more involved with the patient is that he always had a reverse curve smile. His whole life, his laterals and centrals were much shorter than his cuspids. So he liked it and he wanted to stay in that world. So no problem. Now we can design our wax up accordingly. We can provisionalize the patient from there, take our final impression. This is going to be 1 full coverage, 2 implants, and then another veneer right next to it. So again, mixing up the materials like where I started from. One little trick here that I think I wanted to share with you is notice the little tip that the doctor gave me back. And that is basically some composite that he or she, whoever's giving it to you, will look to get close to the color of the tissue in the mouth. This way they're transferring the color to you easier, and you can keep that with the case. I fabricated 2 abutments. You'll notice a hole in one, and I'll show you why in a minute. I'm going to make a metal substructure and a metal PFM. And by the way, I sound like I only do metal. Of course, we do a ton of zirconia and lithium silicate. Just these particular cases were more metal-oriented cases. And then we have a veneer on the adjacent tooth. I'll go through the same build-up process. You guys don't need to see the same thing over and over again. So opacious dent in a little G4 up around this area to get some color there. I'll finish off my shape. I'll start creating my canvas. Everything that we've done and everything else, no different. I'll use my Mamelon materials and other material effects, maybe an effect chroma if I need, and I control the light transmission in the white, just like we did before. A little bit of a whiter enamel, start frosting out over this, and I'll just put a little bit more pink on from my first bake. So I have something there, but notice I'm keeping it away from the embrasure spaces and just about a little low on the CEJ on purpose. And then when I have that all done and I really like it, in my glaze, I'm going to come back and put my final pink on. And very similar to before, this might be G1, G2, or G3 mixed in with some translucent and usually a little bit of a correction material there. So I get a little bit more translucency, but I also get the right firing parameter at the end. And we'll finish the restorations up, send those back to the doctor. When we send them out, we're sending them with a jig. The jig is made on the model. This is so that when the doctor takes the abutments off the model, he or she can pick them up and drop them right in the mouth, and they know right away if everything is going to fit. If that doesn't fit in that jig, we've missed something somewhere along the way. Also, remember I said cementation is the biggest problem. So we can also give the doctor back these cement jigs. This way, when they do put cement in the restoration, even if it's temp cement, they could push the jig in and out and get rid of all the excess cement that they don't need, saves them some cleanup time. And you can see here that I have a screw coming through the lingual. That's because we're going to set screw this in, so the cement won't be so important for us. And the doctor will always have retrievability and access to get to those restorations or abutments if he or she ever needs, in this case, he, Salam. So we'll put the restorations in the mouth. Patient was fairly happy. The gums still look a little beat up here, but I think that'll get better and better as time goes on. And Sean's going to walk away feeling really happy and kind of a different person from where he started. And I think that's always the key, right? Is that we can get the patient to feel the most comfortable and we can do the best job that we can do for them to feel comfortable. And I always say maybe sometimes it's best to let the patient tell you their story rather than us. So I'll let Sean speak for himself.
I mean, they just look great. I'm super happy. Tell me about, you know what, the experience of having teeth again.
Oh my God, it's awesome. I'm sure as you noticed when I first walked in here, my front lip was kind of covering my teeth a little bit more than they are now. You just walk around with more confidence. It's pretty nice to not pop your teeth out before you eat any meals, so that's pretty nice. Like you go to a restaurant, you want to like bite into something, but hey, you've got the retainer and I've got to pop this out, so you're like secretly doing it.
So you get the idea. So he was really comfortable and happy and a really nice guy and a great patient. So I'm running a little over. It's still a few minutes to 1, but I usually try to leave 10 minutes for questions. But I have nowhere to go. By the way, I think I don't have a meeting until 3 o'clock today. So I'm yours. Let me say, in case I lose some of you, because I know we start to lose a few people at the very end here, I can't thank you enough for being here with us this whole time. I'm going to stay and answer some questions, but in case you're one of the people who pop off quick, thank you for spending 6 weeks with me. It's hard to believe it's been 6 weeks. I know 6 weeks ago when we started this, you were probably all like, oh, I'm not going to make it through 6 of these, but thank you for being here with us. Thank you to Jim for hosting and the organizing. And thank you for the VITA team for really making this happen for us. I think our profession needed a little education and things right now. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And just so you know, I probably love teaching more than anything. So I'm missing being in front of the audience as much as you guys are missing being out and in your favorite places. So I look forward to get back. With that said, Jim, I'll turn it back over to you, and hopefully we have a few questions and people can hang with us a little bit longer since I ran a little late today, which is why I left out the recap. I knew I was going to run over.
No, that was awesome, Peter. And thanks again. I mean, the 6 weeks went by very quick because, you know, we were able to listen to you on the 6-week webinar every Tuesday at the same time. It was an excellent time. All of the webinars were very useful, very informative, and we know that you have a very strong passion for educating all of us. So we greatly appreciate your participation as well. Before we get to the Q&A, for any of you that want a question, you'll have that question box that you can pull out of your panel, and you can write the question and send it in. All of the webinars of the 6-week series have been recorded. They all can receive, you can receive CE credit for it, 1 hour each. At the end of this webinar, you should receive from our education department a email in which there'll be a couple links that you can link to, and then that'll guide you through obtaining your CE information. Also, you can visit us on the VITA websites, such as VITA North America YouTube, the Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and view those recordings as well. So today's Q&A, let's start off with Peter, something that you probably always anticipate. What kind of removable tissue material do you use?
So it's funny, if you look back at the first case I showed you, I was using clear PVS material, and that actually worked really well. We've transitioned that to our trays that I showed you today, and I think we're sticking, I think it's the GC one now, but we have switched a few. Jen's probably sitting there trying to text me as we're speaking right now. I think we switched to the GC, but if you email me, I'll definitely email you back. Only because we've switched like 5 in the last 2 years, and I'm not sure exactly which one we're using today. So I don't want to give you the wrong info. Email me, and I'll send you a list of the ones we use.
So I've got one for myself, though. Do you like the harder soft tissue material or the softer one?
Yeah, so we got away from the ones where you can only grind on them with a high-speed kind of diamond. We've gone to the harder materials that I can carve a little bit or just use any burr to take away. And I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on which one it was, but I'll definitely get an answer if you just email me. I'll gladly give it to you.
So Kate has a kind of a multiple question on the different portions you use for your Zirconia frameworks, your PFM frameworks. Do you use feldspathic porcelain? What kind of porcelains are you using for your frameworks typically?
So obviously, all those cases, because they were, let's say, slightly older cases, are most likely in either VM9 or VM13. 1 or 2 of the newer cases, I'm working closer with the new ceramic, the VITA Lumex AC material, but most of those are either VM13 or VM9. And the system is very set the same, meaning that instead of opacious dentures, I have effect chromas. But in general, the process is very much the same for me. I'm looking to create opacity on the inside and more translucency as I get towards the outside. So the process is the same. I'm just choosing the material for the substructure. And because the coefficients are different, I need different ceramics for either zirconia or metal ceramic.
John has a question on titanium abutments and whether or not you actually, do you apply porcelain to those? If so, what porcelain do you use? And if you've ever anodized your abutments a pink color or a gold color?
Yeah, so John, yes and no. So yes, I've done all those things. I have applied porcelain to them. I even helped develop a ceramic that goes on titanium years ago. I've gotten away from it for many reasons. For one, titanium abutments are very nice. They're very healthy, biocompatible tissue-wise. The challenge with any milled abutment, I know I'm going to kind of throw everybody for a little bit of a loop here because we mill so many abutments. It's a good thing to do. But let me just give you a little background information so you understand. Even if you have a great machine in your office that's a 5-axis machine, it's not really 5-axis. They're usually 2/3. That means one component moves 2 ways, one component moves 3 ways. That problem alone makes it very difficult for us truly to mill emergence profiles the way we really should, besides for the deficiencies in the CAD part or the designing part in our computer systems. So we don't really get ideal emergence in titanium abutments. And a lot of times when we make a titanium abutment, when they come back into my lab, Keon's going to spend time remodifying them, changing shapes and forms. So that's one thing. As far as anodizing them goes, I would argue that pink is not necessarily the color I want to put under tissue. I really want to put whiter colors because that's what the bone would normally look like. And two, depending on the biotype of the tissue, I don't always need to mask it. And if I'm going to use it as a tie sleeve, meaning it's just a titanium cylinder that I'm going to put zirconia or something over, then posteriorly I usually have more than enough room. I'm not worried about the color inside. I'm only really worried about it on the tissue levels or more in anterior.
All right. Another question from Scott is, what kind of investment do you use for your PFM cases?
MicroStar. So we're still using the MicroStar investment. Keon is really, you know, and again, I have such a good team. It's hard to tell you things because nothing I'm hiding. I'll tell you anything. But my team operates very independently. And what I mean by that is, you know, Keon might use a 20 and 10 water liquid ratio. And then he might find that in the summertime or in, you know, humid weather, he changes it to 18 and 12. And so I don't monitor every time they make changes, but I do know that my team is really efficient in the sense that nothing is a standard. Yeah, that's why even with the gingival material, right? I know we've switched it 15 times in the last 2 years because we always keep looking for a better version of the next one. So, but we do use MicroStar investment.
So Ryan is asking, it's a good question. How do you communicate or work with the doctor on the pink tone? How do you decide with the doctor which color of pink, which tone of pink do you use?
Yeah, so that's why I showed you that slide that Savan had made where he'll take a little wood stick and he'll find some composites. He has a pink composite kit in his office, and he'll actually pick a few composites that he feels are really close. Bernadette's done that a few times too, and they'll basically give me a custom pink shade tab. Now, I want to be clear, that doesn't mean I'm going to match the pink all the time, right? Because matching pink is even harder than matching a single central because I got so many different tones and thicknesses. But it's only really challenging, honestly, when you're working with pink in very small areas. When you're doing a whole arch of pink, then it's our job just to create as much lifelike as we can and try to create enough depth with colors and translucencies and using other materials. Like I said, I mix some of the 1 with the 3 sometimes. I mix some of the 2 with a white translucent, or I lower the temperature of it. So each of those things I'm playing with the ability for it to harmonize a little bit better intraorally.
All right. Michael has a 2-part question. How do you manage emergent profile for molars, given that usually the size of a molar on the cervical is so much wider than the implant diameter? And then 2, what do you use? What's the material you use for creating the temporaries?
So first part, Michael, is you're placing, or the doctors are placing, the wrong implants. So if I have a molar which might be 8-10 millimeters in width from mesial to distal, and the doctor's putting a 3.0 or a 3.5 implant in there, it's a huge mistake for many reasons. Now, the doctors may tell you that, well, I couldn't put a bigger one, I didn't have enough this, I didn't have enough that. Well, then maybe it's not an implant site. Maybe it's something to think through differently. And the reason that is because the more space you have, the more narrow the implant is, the more you create a cantilever effect. And this is why crowns get loose and screws get loose occlusally more than anything else. And it's also very disfiguring for the implant, meaning that you're putting a lot of torquing pressure. So if you can't get the width of implant that you need, and I would argue you can today, because again, that's why I showed you a little history. 10 years ago, it was hard to do some of the things, and we were learning our way through them. Today, they make 9,000 different implants that are wider, shorter, taller, longer. They have everything you need. It's just a matter of knowing which ones are out there and choosing them. And as far as provisionals go, we either use straight old acrylic or PMMA. Sometimes we'll use composite, and sometimes we'll use enamic, nanohybrids, depending on the length of the provisional or if the doctor needs to add to it. We find that doctors don't like adding to the PMMA as well, even though we do like the PMMA materials. So with some doctors, we'll use just a base acrylic floor, or sometimes we'll mill enamic if we can, because they could bond to that easier if they're going to manage the emergence profile themselves.
So your philosophy for implants, like all of us, have changed over the years. But what do you feel about? Do you always splint implants together, or are they left individual? This is by Eureka.
Yeah,
or
so
Eureka.
I would tell you that yes, it has changed immensely, and the goal is not to connect if I don't have to. Now, that doesn't mean that that's a law, because I could tell you, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of a case that Bernadette and I struggled with where we should have connected them because the last implant was in the most distal position. And one of the studies that's out recently this year or last year says that every implant you place will have an open contact within a year. That means if you put one implant in and the tooth next to it is natural, that tooth's going to move and shift a little bit. If you put two implants in, you have a better chance of them not moving. They're not going anywhere, but that doesn't mean that depending on the angulation of the implant, the depth of bone or the type of bone you had was ideal to put that much pressure or torque on, especially if it's a non-balanced occlusion. So the answer is not a yes or no answer. It's I would try to keep everything as single, screw retained as possible, but it doesn't mean I don't bend the rules when I need to for the certain cases.
Sometimes we have to, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. So Kim has a question on one of the earlier cases in your presentation. You had an abutment with porcelain under the tissue. Was that a cast 2 UCLA type abutment, or was this a custom abutment?
No, so it was a cast UCLA, and I'm assuming, Kim, your question really is, how did I put regular ceramic on that abutment? And the answer to that is, when you buy a UCLA, the metal that's on the base that's preformed for you is a 52% gold. It's not a ceramic metal, so you can't put composite on it. Now, you can't put ceramic on it. Now, here's a simple fix. Use a UCLA, cut it back, and use a composite bonding agent and put composite there. It's going to be under the tissue. You don't have to worry about it. We didn't do that. What we did was we ground away a little bit of the metal interface, and then we added it back in wax so that when we cast it, the interface itself was still the manufacturer's interface, but right above it was now our metal that we were able to put ceramic to.
All right, for your placement jigs, Lisa has a question on what material do you use for those jigs?
Say that again.
On your abutment placement jigs, you probably use Duralay or something like that. But what material do you use for that jig?
So actually, we don't use Duralay. Duralay, believe it or not, has out of all those materials, kind of has the highest shrinkage factor. So we like the Picoplast from Bredent is one, and we also get another one from I'm brain dead today. I'm sorry, from a friend of ours company that actually makes them. Sasha makes them from Harvest. He has one that's an injectable version of it that you can actually use, and it's a little less shrinkage than the other materials. So I like Sasha's from Harvest Dental. We like the Bredent Picoplast, which Keon uses a lot for injecting. And there's one other company that we use too, but I can't remember what's the name of it right now.
I just wanted to show my age, so talk about Duralay.
No,
so Ryan has a
trust me.
Yeah. So Ryan has a question about.
Jen just texted me as you're saying that. Primotech is the other company that we use it from. They're good people. And Jen, since
that's a good company.
You didn't tell me the name of the soft tissue material. I'm shocked. You did email, text me the Primotech right away. Yes, Primotech is always a great company. So Primotech, Harvest Dental, and the pattern resin from Bredent are the three that we predominantly use in the lab.
All right. So Ryan uses quite a bit of VM9. He's kind of asking about the equivalency, comparability between VM9 and Lumex AC, and if you feel a difference, and which one is your go-to now as far as using it for many applications.
Yeah, so to be honest, Ryan, I've been using VM9 for a lot of years now, right? So it's a no-brainer think for me because I'm just used to it, and it's kind of like with some other ceramic materials that I used for so long, they're secondary nature for me. But let me be clear that the difference between 9 and the new Lumex AC is they are two different animals, and what I mean by that is the VM9 this went off on a little journey from what normal ceramics were doing. I think it was great. It was a little harder to teach the people. The concepts were a little bit different, and some of the powders weren't exactly what we were used to, right? You didn't have a simple opacious dentin. You didn't have certain materials that you were used to from other kits. The Lumex has kind of gone back to the original concepts, but I think it's smart, to be honest with you. So we have opacious dentins and those normal materials. It's also slightly higher in opacity, not by much, but a little bit, because I would say one of the weaknesses with 9 and 13 is they're a little too translucent sometimes. And that's, managing. We can manage that, but you need to be aware of it. And then the other big thing that I think is important for you to realize is VM9 is really made for zirconia. The new Lumex AC I can use on zirconia and lithium disilicate. I could also use it for veneering, and it also works with VM9, and I could use it as an add-on, and I can also use it over all the other components like Mark II and all the other products that work similar to that. So it has a pretty wide range CDT-wise, where most of the older powders, and old is a bad word, but the previous systems, let's say, have a little more narrow of a path of what they can go on.
Great. So John has a question. Do you ever use chrome for abutments?
No. Simple answer, John. No, I don't. Now, I know that's a bad way to say the answer. It's pretty high throughout the world, by the way, even in Europe, that they're using a lot of chrome cobalt type metals today, and especially because of sintered metals and the companies that are milling copings for you. We don't use any in the lab. I've always been against them. I think years from now we're going to regret that we use them. The tissue response to them is not good, and then there's a lot of, I work with 2 offices that are biological offices where they really try not to use metal at all. If I even, I push them into a metal sometimes because of the case. If I even told them that it was a chrome cobalt in there, they would never go for it intraorally. And by the way, just to answer the question, see how great Jen is? The soft tissue is from Kerr. Molars, it's called. It's a Kerr product. Yeah, I knew she'd know.
Excellent. Thanks, Jen. Jack has a question on what's the system you use for those lingual set screws?
Those are Bredent screws, and we're using the 1.6. We don't use the 1.4. They're Morse taper screws. So basically that means that where the insert is an angulation and the screw has an angulation. So the more you talk it, the tighter it kind of becomes. We did find the 1.4s don't work very well for us, although we use them once in a while, but we really love the 1.6s. And part of the great evolution of my evolution system is that years ago, poor Keon would spend, midnights through 6 in the morning tapping the screws himself in the evolution frames. Now we have companies that can pre-tap the screws for us. But I got to be honest and brag about Keon for a second, because as I was looking through this before, I had some other cases I want to put in, but I just didn't have time. I could show you cases with single unit lateral abutments that we made a metal coping over with, and Keon was able to set screw a lateral through the lingual, and you would never know it's there. I mean, he's gotten so good with how we manage the system, and I give him the credit for it, because I'm like a prima donna now, and when he gives me a metal coping to finish, I'm like, oh, I get so much metal on me. This is no good, right? So it's kind of funny that he owns it and mastered it so well, everything implant metal-wise, besides all the other amazing things he could do.
All right, so Michael has a short question, but maybe a much broader, longer response or answer. Can Peter share how he is making the temps, material, and technique?
Yeah, so I mean, a quick answer is everything is either a wax up or a setup from acrylic denture teeth or wax up, depending on which it is. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use an Annextent system, and Annextent has a lot of great little teaching tools online you can go on. But the way it basically works is, let's say I have a wax up on a cast, we're going to make a putty matrix of that and cover it over. And once it's cured, we can now remove that putty. And we have a few options. We could use the putty to the cast, or we could take the cast and set it up into a flasking system that's got putty on both sides. And then once the wax is removed and the cast stays there, we now have the ability to re-inject wax. So we can inject wax, acrylic, composites. I mean, you can inject almost anything you want. And it's a very similar system to what we do with everything else, meaning that when Keon's designing a subframe, he'll take that temporary putty that we have, go back to the cast, and maybe inject the Bredent resin into that, and then cut the frame back rather than waxing it. So it's a system we use so much in the lab, and it's a really time-saving and efficient system for us.
So you touched on this a little bit, but we have another question on, what's your feeling, clinically speaking, on custom abutments versus prefabricated titanium abutments? Do you find a better adaptation with either or both?
The answer is one that they're not going to like. And the answer is never, never, never is a prefabricated abutment better than a custom abutment, unless the person designing the custom abutment doesn't have a clue about emergence profile and contour. So we don't ever use standard abutments, or very, very, very rarely would we use a standard abutment. It's always custom contoured. We're usually using higher golds. I don't mind using titanium if we're going to mill them, but we're usually going to modify or tweak them. And for me, that's just the system that we feel is best for the patient. And we don't use any non-precious metals or chrome cobalt type metals at all.
All right. Margaret's kind of asking, what's your ratio between the fabricating custom abutments by milling versus casting your larger substructures? Yeah,
I'm sorry. Again, I'm throwing you guys answers you probably don't like to hear, but it's extreme. We're casting probably 80-something% of them and only milling about 20%. And that's, boy, from what I see around the profession, it's the complete opposite, right? Most labs I go in there, they're milling 100% of them, and they laugh at me when I tell them I buy a UCLA. We're still going the other direction, but also we're kind of a very big implant lab. We're about 70% implants in our lab. So a lot of the doctors that are sending to us are looking for a certain type of an implant restoration, and we need to be able to control all the parameters for it.
Kim is asking, essentially, if you do single units for implants, do you use anytime those tie bases or the Vario base from Straumann?
Yeah, so obviously if it's going to be a Zirconia or lithium disilicate, then of course we're going to go straight to the tie bases. Yeah, and there's a few companies. We like Straumann's actually, and there's a few other companies that have good systems. Especially, I think there's a company that works well with the Amon gearbox system that we use. So there's a few companies out there that are making them today, and we have no problem using the tie bases, especially if it's going to be a screw retained Zirconia or lithium disilicate or enamic. But as you should know, based on I think module 1 or 2, if I'm screw retaining my implants, especially posterior, which I would like to, the ideal material for me is going to be an enamic material, which, Jim, I think that's what you're going to speak about on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken.
Thursday, yeah. Yes.
The shock absorber concept.
Correct. Well, thanks, Peter. That ends the questions. I want to thank the audience and everyone that actually followed us all 6 weeks. We greatly appreciate that. And Peter, thank you so much for helping us out with these past 6 weeks. Each webinar is a standalone. It was excellent knowledge, excellent information that we really, really appreciate. And I think I speak for all the listeners that have followed us all 6 weeks. So thank you very much for your time and your effort and your training and the information you provided us.
Thank you, Jim. And I appreciate all you did and our team did behind the scenes. And most importantly, I want to thank all of you. I can't tell you how much the emails and the texts and the messages and the pictures that I got from my friend in Detroit and all the little nice things that people have done to stay in touch and say thank you. They all mean a lot. So thank you guys so much. If you want something else that I could do during this time, just email me or Jim and we'll try to help you. And in the meantime, I really wish everybody some health and some possibility of getting back to a new norm. And more importantly, hopefully being in your area again and working with you guys closer is kind of the big goal for me. So I'm hoping that happens. Invite me out when things are normal and I'll try to come to your town and help you through whatever you're doing and make us better, because that's what I want. I want us all to be viable technicians down the road. So thank you for all the nice thoughts and emails and texts, guys, and I appreciate it. And I hope I get to see you guys soon. I really do.
All right, thank you very much, Peter. For those that are still on the line, you can always revisit Peter's webinars, all 6 of them, on the VITA North America websites, including YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and then you can also review those and acquire additional CE as well. So again, thank you, Peter. And this concludes the VITA Learning webinar featuring Peter Pizzi. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.